Welcome to Commander Central episode 226, and today, in honor of Zendikar Rising's Black Enchantment rule spell Feed the Swarm, we're going to be talking about artifact and enchantment removal. I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.
Gentlemen, how y'all doing today?
It's snowing.
I was just going to say, Chris made that sound, and I can see that it's snowing outside.
I didn't even realize it was snowing. My blinds are closed.
Yeah.
God.
I mean, it's not going to stay, but still, that's just a sign that doesn't ever make me happy.
I'm going fishing tomorrow morning, too, so I hope this isn't a trend.
You're going to fight through it regardless of whether or not it's snowing or not.
Well, I'm going muskie fishing, so yeah, there is no ifs, ands, or buts about that.
Oh.
Yeah, that's rough, but it is what it is. Nothing we can do about it. We do live in Wisconsin. We should expect this kind of thing, I guess, in October.
No, it's like the middle of October. It's not even the end.
It is
yet,
too, right. It isn't even like the end of October necessarily. It's middle of October. Of course, my son walked the dog this morning in shorts and a t-shirt and came back and I'm like, weren't you cold? He's like, well, it's a little cold though. I'm like, man, to be 13 or 12 again and just not even register temperature anymore.
Oh, I know how that goes. It's like the summer when my in-laws live on the river and my son would jump in and like, hey, let's go swim. And I jump in. I'm like, oh no, we're done. Never again.
I mean, I had my bedroom window open next to my work from home station all morning until I saw the snow. I'm like, oh, I should probably close my window now.
Yeah. It's a bit chilly. So it's a weird day today. They don't have school because it's parent-teacher conferences. So my wife's at school because she's a teacher, so she's there doing conferences, but my son's home with me. And he had a few online lessons to do and a few things like that. So he did his homework, and then I had a list of a few chores I wanted him to take care of. So he started going through those. And one of the things was he had to move some cardboard boxes out onto the porch where we keep cardboard recycling. It's like a back screened-in area off the back of my house. And I take the stuff out to the porch, break it up and put it with recycling. He did all his stuff. I quick checked and I went and I was going to I had some other cardboard I was going to throw in with that. And I went out there and none of the cardboard was in the porch. And I'm like, well, so I went upstairs and I'm like, where did you put that cardboard? He's like, well, it's on the porch. I'm like, I just checked. There's nothing down there. He's like, no, there's a small screened-in porch off his bedroom.
Oh. On
the second floor. He's like, I put it out there. I'm like, why would you... Why would you lug the cardboard boxes upstairs and put them on the screen porch off your bedroom? He's like, well, I don't know. You said the porch. I'm like, I did. Technically, you're correct. and then I was flashing back to, I'm like, man, it definitely wasn't over cardboard on a porch. But I can remember being that age and my dad just being like, why did you do that? So that was very much a turning into my father moment there this morning.
You're not even mad at your kid neither when they do that. You're just like, I'm so dumbfounded. What's going on?
Right. That was exactly my reaction. Like, how does your brain work? And then I remembered being that age and my brain working that way. So,
yep.
Technically is the best type of correct.
Right. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Well, if anyone out there in the listener land would like to reach out to us and talk about crazy things your kid did, how would you go about doing that, Chris?
Well, you can hit us up on the Twitter birds at CMDR Central. You can search us up, send us a message on Facebook, CMDR Central, and find us online at cmdrcentral.com.
You can also head over to patreon.com/CMDR Central and check out our reward tiers if you are so inclined to support us financially. They range from entering our Slack to talk with us and all of our other listeners to getting one of our Planeswalker cards to maybe guesting on our show.
Yes, indeed. Any support there is greatly appreciated, and any support at all is a big deal, whether it's just engagement by listening to us on YouTube or that very valuable upvote and like on any platform out there. Anything you can do means a lot, and we really do appreciate it. I think we have a contest ongoing right now, Max.
Yeah, so currently for all of our Patreon supporters and future Patreon supporters, as long as you are supporting us by the end of the month, you'll be entered in to win patron supporters Dracolution Zada Hedron Grinder Gumball deck that he built for the community challenge we did a few months ago. A lot of fun deck to play. I played against it. It just needs a good home now. So, enter in and hopefully that goes off to someone who's going to enjoy it.
Very, very cool. Yeah, and I'm always surprised at the generosity of our patrons, too. They're like, hey, guys, I enjoy your content. Here, give away this thing. That's just always insane to me. So for everyone who's done that and for Dracolution this time, thank you very much. That's super cool, and we appreciate it. Games we played this week, I think Max played on stream last week with, I think, Guardian Pod. Is that right, Max?
Yeah, I got invited on to play on Guardian Project's stream, which is every Thursday night. So I got to sit down and play 2 games with Andy, Coyle, and Brian from Into the 99. I got to play Dramoka and Tuvasa. Did not win either game. Dramoka, I kept a 3-land hand with a bunch of 4-mana spells in it, so I thought I was fine. And then by about turn 9, I drew my 5th land. So that was fun.
That's tough.
But that game was a lot of fun, a lot of back and forth between all 4 players. The game went almost 2.5 hours.
Oof.
So yeah, it was a fun, grindy game. Eventually I got into it and got to get some blows in, but it was fun.
Nice.
Second game, we sped it up a little. We all played bit more faster decks, and a Xyrus deck just ended up killing us all with snakes, flying 2/2 snakes.
At that point in the game, I was not watching. I was just listening because I was working on actually show notes for this show. But I did hear at some point someone's like, I attack with 36 2/2 snakes or something like that. I'm like, oh, that's definitely not going to be something someone survives.
All I'm thinking about with flying snakes is Samuel L. Jackson yelling a whole bunch of expletives and snakes on a plane.
Which at this point is like, probably a 12-year-old movie, if not more.
Yep. If you haven't seen that movie, check it out. You will be highly disappointed, but it's also a good movie at the same time.
It's not as good as the meme, is what you're saying.
No, not at all.
It's a cult classic, I think, is what that falls into.
There you go. Well, I get to play on stream on Wednesday, TDH Recast with Jake Boss from Command Zone. So those were pretty good games. And I'm going to be playing tomorrow, which this will air on Monday. So I guess it would have been technically I already played on Saturday on Benny Smith's stream on Saturday afternoon. He's just doing something kind of casual on Saturday, so I'm going to show up and play, I think, 1 game with him, or we'll have already played it, so I think he has VODs up if you want to go look at his Twitch channel. Video on demand should be up for that, so we're just going to play a little bit of Casual Commander on Saturday afternoon, and the camera we ordered Chris got not delivered, so we had to order him a second one, so there's a short delay there on getting him up and online, but hopefully very, very soon.
I was talking to Max on the phone about that, and I'm like, I have a feeling I'm going to get a bad reputation, because I haven't played in a long time, and I'm just going to be like vicious and mean, because I'm like, oh, I'm going to destroy somebody, and people are like, we don't want to play with him anymore.
He's a jerk. Well, we do have one brief announcement we'll make here, too. Commander Legends is coming out in November. I don't even remember the date at this point because it's been pushed back a few times. But we will announce that we have a preview card that we will be previewing on October 30th. Is that right, Max?
That is correct.
Okay, so preview cards from Commander Central for Commander Legends on October 30th. So we're super hyped about that. We just looked at the cards and, they're very good.
It's going to be awesome.
Very, very cool. And speaking of Legends, we did have a few leaks that came out, true leaks, like somebody in Germany took a picture of some cards from a printing press, I would assume. Someone got a box out. We won't go talk about those leaks. I mean, if you want the information, it's out there. I don't think we need to really get into it, especially because someone's going to get burned. There's some content creator probably out there who's going to get was excited to get those cards, and they already got leaked, and that's. I think in the past we've talked a little bit about leaks when they've happened, but I don't think we want to get into that this time. It's just bad business. So they are out there if you want to look at them, but the stuff will be actually previewed here in the very near future. So I am patient enough to wait until then. Main topic here today, gentlemen, artifact and enchantment removal. And this is kind of inspired by the addition of Feed the Swarm in black. For those that don't recall, Feed the Swarm is a 1 in a black sorcery that says destroy target creature or enchantment and opponent controls. And then you lose life equal to that permanent's converted mana cost. So it's the first real true enchantment removal spell black has ever had, and this isn't like a mistake or an accident. This is something that they've said it's now going to be part of black's slice of the color pie, and the reason for that is they don't think one color should be unable to interact with 2 different permanent types. Black can't deal with artifacts, and it couldn't deal with enchantments before, so they're going to let them actually deal with enchantments now. That way it's only really vulnerable to one specific thing. So first things first, and we'll kind of talk about this particular change before we get into anything else. What do you guys think of this color pie change where black can now deal with enchantments? And I'll throw it to Max here first.
I really like this a lot. I think this is one of those color pie breaks that is good for the game, especially kind of like they said, you can't play a monocolor deck that can't deal with 2 different types of permanents. I can understand maybe not being able to deal with one, whether it's enchantments or artifacts, but not really being able to take care of both really puts you down a peg compared to the rest of the color pie.
And it's definitely a very black feeling way to do it by adding the fact that it actually hits you and hurts you. And you can't hit your own stuff. So you can't save yourself from that, is it Demonic Pact, the Liliana one, where you have to choose a mode and the last one is lose the game?
Yes.
So you can't save yourself from your own things that are hurting you too. So it definitely feels like a black version of that. How about you, Chris? What do you think here?
I like it. And I also don't like it.
Okay.
And let me explain this. First thing is that this card is amazing, and it's the beginning of something that could be new and fun, and brought to the game because it's like it leads you to like, okay, now white's missing card draw, so hopefully they'll bring that in and all that stuff. And, it makes you just excited like, a 10-year-old kid at Christmas all over again.
Sure.
So now we're going to go into the Debbie Downer talk here, and I'm going to just lay it out there and say straight up that the reason I do not like this is because this is turning into the green shenanigans all over again, where this color is getting something that is, making it overpowered as a monocolored type of card. Whereas, you're not branching into another color to fill the void of the weakness that this color already has.
I kind of agree with that. No, I think I understand the logic. Absolutely in saying black shouldn't be vulnerable to different things. I also don't know if it mattered for black. I felt like mono black was strong enough. It just didn't care. I also thought it was kind of flavorful that black had two weaknesses and didn't care. Its response to that was, I'm just going to remove you rather than remove your two things.
Yep.
But like I said, I don't think it's a big deal. Like, had I been on the committee that voted for this, I probably would have voted against black getting enchantment removal. But after the pro side won, I wouldn't have been mad about it. I wouldn't have broke off from everyone else and done my own thing because I was so upset about it. I'm kind of on board with what Chris said a little bit, although I'm mostly fine with it. As for Feed the Swarm itself, the card, I don't think we really talked about it too much under our set review a couple weeks back. What are your thoughts on the card? Is it playable? What deck situations would you run it? And Chris can take this one first. What are your thoughts on it?
So, opinion on the card overall, I think the design is perfect. I mean, it fits everything as it's supposed to be, the idea of black being the color of darkness, the color of evil, that kind of stuff. So you're losing life to destroy something and all that. And it's sorcery speed, which in my opinion kind of shows me that Wizards was looking at this card and they're like, okay, we're going to test this. So we don't want to make this too strong, make it an instant speed removal. We want to see how this plays and make sure it doesn't become one of those immediate staples where it turns into, a highly sought after card and everybody's playing it.
Yeah, you're way better off starting off low and then bumping those levers up slightly every single time you release a new version than you are starting too high and be like, oh, we got to pull it back.
Yeah, I mean, like Omnath and Standard. Oops, that was a mistake.
How about you, Max? What do you think here?
I agree. I love the design of the card. I like the aspect that in order to do this, you hurt yourself a little bit. I think this kind of opens up the door for kind of more design space with this type of idea. So maybe instead of you lose life equal to the permanent CMC, you add the clause of an additional cost to cast this, sacrifice a creature. So
sure, they
lose something, you lose something. I really like that trade-off. I don't think it makes it too powerful, but it also could play into some strengths black has in the Grave Pact effects or just, value from sacrificing stuff.
Yeah, I would definitely guess we'll get multiple different variants on this over the next, several years. And I would not be shocked to see that sacrifice a creature, that Altars Reap kind of version of this, where sack a creature, destroy an artifact, or destroy an enchantment version for sure. So yeah, I totally see that. I kind of agree. I think it's good enough in Rakdos or Mono Black where you don't have any other options. I'm testing it in my Rakdos deck. I got to cast it this week on a Cauldron of Souls and didn't bother me at all losing the 5 life. So I think it's playable in those colors and it's safe enough. Smothering Tide is a great card, but the problem with Smothering Tide is it's almost not a white card. It's just a card you run in almost any deck that has access to white.
Right.
Or at least you can run it. I don't think you have to, but it's good enough to run in any deck that has white. This is useful in situations where black needs it, but it's not the kind of thing that every deck running black is going to run at all. Max is not going to put it in his Orzhov deck.
Right.
So that's a good balance. And I'll use it in some slots, but it's a black specific spell and not just generically absurd everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Now that we've talked about that card, let's get into the next thing, which is your philosophies and our thoughts on artifact enchantment removal. And why this is relevant here is because the other 3 permanent types, every color can kind of deal with. Like, every color has a way to deal with creatures for the most part. They all maybe don't have sweepers, but like they can take control of creatures or bounce them to hand or counterspell them or, kill them with fight damage or just deal damage to them or directly exile them or whatever. Like, every color can respond to creatures. Not every color has spells that can hit lands, but every color has access to lands that can hit lands.
Yep.
So that's something you can deal with. Planeswalkers are a little bit trickier, but like if you're not running creatures or don't have evasion, but like the pieces are there. It's just a matter of whether or not you're in the right position to do it. Planeswalkers lose loyalty when they get hit by a creature, and every color has access to creatures. There's also really cheap colorless solutions, unlike artifact enchantment removal, where you're looking at, a Scar from Existence at 7 mana. Everybody can spend 1 colorless on a Pithing Needle to shut down a planeswalker or something.
Mm-hmm.
So those are respondable. Artifacts and enchantments are weird. They're something that not every color has ways baked in to deal with, and they also tend to not get hit with sweepers nearly as often. And they're really, really strong. So it's like a specific niche of permanence that we always want to talk about removing. And we want to talk about that a little bit in some depth here. So I want to talk about our personal thoughts on artifact enchantment removal. For the purpose of this discussion, we're going to talk about things that hit artifacts or enchantments or both. We're not going to talk about things that destroy anything like Generous Gift. I think if there was 7 different variants of Generous Gift or Vindicate or whatever, people would probably just run those, but there aren't. At some point, if you want to have enough answers, you have to probably deal with things that just hit one or the other or both, not that hit any target.
Or you just play Orzhov and you can't hit any target.
Right. Or you have access to 7 different or 8 different variants on that for sure. You definitely don't need to delve into it there. So let's talk about this. My particular opinion on artifact enchantment removal, particularly like non-sweeper spells, is it needs to hit multiple things. Shatter, for example, probably wouldn't be good enough for me because it only hits artifacts. Whereas something like Nature's Claim, it hits artifacts and enchantments. That's one of the switches for me. If it can hit 2 different things, a Braid might be good enough because I can hit small creatures with a Braid and artifacts. So I think it needs to have that kind of flexibility, or at least some manner of flexibility. I think Vandal Blast also probably qualifies. It can hit 1 artifact, or it can hit everyone else's artifacts. I think that's enough flexibility there. So that's what I'm usually looking at here. How about you, Chris, when it comes to artifact or enchantment removal? What are you looking for specifically in whether or not you run it?
Well, I took a nice long look at all my decks, and I actually realized I don't run a lot of specific artifact or enchantment removal. So I had to sit and think hard about this one. And if I were to run like a monocolor deck or something along that variant where I needed to focus on that, the card needs to be versatile.
Yeah.
So, for instance, like you were talking about Vandal Blast. Another good one is All Is Dust. They can do one thing in a pinch, but if you have, the other way around where you're like, oh, I can just blow someone out, you can use it that way too, which is what I would personally look for, is something that, oh, I only have, X amount of mana and I need to get rid of this now so I can do this. Or it's like, oh, I'm set up where it's my turn, all the mana in the world, I can get rid of everything or 4 or 5 things or whatever else and just blow someone else out.
How about you, Max?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of you. I think the spell has to be versatile. It has to hit either an artifact or an enchantment. Personally speaking, based on my play experience, I tend to run more artifact and or enchantment removal in most of my decks just because, from my play experience, those are the cards that help people win the game. Yeah, you need your big creatures or maybe your combo pieces, but if you don't take care of a True Conviction against your Hesperia deck, Dana, someone's going to die. If you don't take care of, a Paradox Engine when that was legal, someone's probably going to combo out and win.
Sure.
It's those things that they sit there and they don't do anything maybe right away, but they definitely will gain that person so much value over 1 turn, 2 turns, that by the time you go to remove it, it's probably too late.
Yeah, I would definitely say that's very true.
So the more removal I have means I maybe am not in that position as often as, oh, I wish I would have removed that 2 turns ago or 4 turns ago, where, okay, I can get rid of it as long as it's hurting me. If it's not hurting me right now, maybe it can stay another turn.
One thing I've kind of noticed over the years about enchantments, and not necessarily artifacts as much, but definitely with enchantments, like people run creatures that are just low on the curve, so they have something to do on turn 1. Llanowar Elves or Birds of Paradise or things like that are useful, but like they're not necessarily backbreaking. People don't run enchantments unless they are really, really good. No one's like running the enchantment equivalent for the most part of a Birds of Paradise. They're running, Cathar's Crusades or True Convictions or Phyrexian Arenas or Sylvan Libraries or really good removal enchantments as well. But like the things people tend to run for enchantments aren't things that are easily ignored, whereas there's plenty of time someone will drop a creature and you can just, not really care about it. So that's a unique thing I think about enchantments too that makes it so you have to think about them a little more than maybe you do other things.
Well, that's
artifacts to a lesser extent.
Yeah, the case with enchantments is that they're not quite as versatile as a creature. Like, yeah, you may play Llanowar Elves or a Birds of Paradise or whatever early game, but that creature is also a blocker, or in Llanowar Elves' case, an attacker too. Whereas the enchantment is a permanent that once it comes out, it does nothing else for you most of the time. It did its thing and it's done.
Yeah, a lot of times that's very true. So let's go over the individual colors here and see what things we kind of like ourselves in those colors for removal. So let's start with white. I can talk about a couple of my favorites here. Return to Dust has fallen out of favor a little bit. It is 4 mana. I think the problem with Return to Dust is it's one of those, it's kind of modular in that you can either spend 4 mana to exile something at instant speed, or you can spend 4 mana to exile 2 things at sorcery speed. Basically. The problem is when you, after a while, realize you're almost always using it for 2 targets, it ceases to become modular. And 4 mana is also a lot to leave up on the off chance something scary is going to happen, so you can hit 2 targets. So I don't run it as much or like it as much as I did a few years back, but I think it's still a pretty solid card. What's kind of replaced it for me is Crush Contraband, which is always 2 targets. You can't hit 2 enchantments or 2 artifacts. It has to be 1 of each, but it's also an exile, and it's slightly easier to cast at only 1 white mana versus 2 in Return to Dust. I like Crush Contraband a lot. Dismantling Wave, which was a new one that actually I got to preview on the EDH Recast that lets you cycle it, is really, really solid as well. That's one I've started to like a lot in white. I think white has a few less things to talk about, maybe just because it has so many things that hit multiple things. So those are the 3 big ones in white. How about you guys? What do you have that you like here?
My personal favorite, and this is actually an enchantment in itself, and that's Aura of Silence. The ability to,
that card.
Yeah, tax your opponents, and then in a pinch you can sack it to destroy something. And it's something that sits out on the battlefield too, so you don't have to, it's not taking up time in your hand. It's not going to cost you mana later on. Once you have it out on the battlefield, it's something you can just get rid of for free. The other one, which I noticed that even with all of our notes that we didn't say anything about, is Austere Command. The epitome of flexibility in what you want to do with it. That's like what everyone is looking for, and I highly doubt we're going to see another card that does, 12 different modes like that does.
I mean, I'm not 100% certain I would call Austere Command the best board wipe in the game. I think
it's awfully close.
But man, it's close. And like I've never built a white deck. I don't think I have a white deck right now that isn't running it, and I just can't imagine being in a position where I don't. It's so versatile, and it always generates a ton of value. It's so good.
Yep.
Back to Aura of Silence just for a second. The great thing about that card is, too, it always removes something, even if you are just going to play it relatively early just to slow everybody up, and someone goes to remove it, you can always sack, short of a Corrosive Grip, you can always sack it in response and still hit something.
Yep.
So it's not the kind of thing where like you might not get a target. You're always going to get your target in addition to being a pain in everyone's butt as it sits out there.
It might not be the target that you're looking for to use for it, but the ability to get rid of it, in that pinch is huge.
Yeah. How about you, Max? Anything you want to talk about here quick?
One of my favorites, like Chris, is another enchantment called Active Authority. So this is a 3-mana enchantment that when it enters the battlefield, you can exile an artifact, target artifact or enchantment, and then you can, at the beginning of your upkeep, do it again, but the controller of the permanent you exiled gains control of Active Authority. So in a normal deck, this is really a political card. I'm going to exile something, come back to my turn. Hey, I'll get rid of your Soul Ring if you will get rid of someone else's threat that they may play or just played or whatever. I run it in Brago, so I just get to blink it a lot and have a lot of fun with it. But, it's only had 1 printing, so it's kind of a hard card to find, but it's really powerful on its own and when you can kind of abuse it.
And, if you are playing an Enchantress deck or something, it's just going to sit there, and if you don't use it the second time, and you don't have to, just let it sit there and add to your enchantment count and add to your devotion and keep anyone else from playing any bombs, because they know that as soon as they drop that Cathar's Crusade or that privileged position, you're going to zap it with the Active Authority, and if they hit you back or something, well, that's still probably a pretty good trait. Anything that's worth removing to give it to them is probably such a threat that it's still worth having them hit you back with it. So yeah, that's actually one that I don't think I think I have it just in my Sigarda deck currently right now, but I probably should run it more. It is really, really solid.
Yeah.
Since we're going through Wooburg order here, let's jump over to blue because this one's relatively easy. Blue doesn't actually have the ability to remove either, but it can counter both of artifacts and enchantments when they come into play, and it can bounce both of them. I guess the first question here is that the kind of thing worth fixing like they fixed with black? Is it worth giving blue removal for artifacts or enchantments? Do you guys have thoughts on that?
No.
I'll let Chris talk here.
No. So, as we were talking before, Usher Command, it might not be the best board wipe, but guess what? Blue has the best board wipe in Cyclonic Rift. I mean, no, I don't think that blue needs something like this. It doesn't really, blue's not known as the color to directly destroy. You have the 2 creature destructions and Pongify and whatever the other one is and all that, which
rapid hybridization,
which are already super powerful.
Reality Shift is really good too.
Yeah, even that one, even better. But blue is more the color that's supposed to dictate when things actually happen, and keep everyone a step behind them. It's not meant to destroy stuff. It's supposed to be like, you know what, we're going to just kind of stasis that for right now. And you can have that in 2 turns, or you can have that next turn or something while I get a little bit farther ahead of you.
Yeah, I'm kind of on board with that. I think the fact that blue can respond in the stack is good enough. The fact that it can still bounce everything is good enough. I don't think it needs something necessarily here. When you guys build blue, do you build with that in mind? Are you like, I better make sure I run a Capsize and a Boomerang or whatever just so I can bounce an enchantment? Or do you tend to run bounce anyway, just generically enough so it just winds up working out that way? What do you usually do there in terms of dealing with those problems?
I typically don't, build bounce into my decks. I mean, Cyclonic Rift is there, but I just prefer straight up counter spells, an Arcane Denial, Pact of Negation,
sure.
OG counterspell. If it means I put 1 or 2 extra counter spells to deal with that, Doubling Season or Smothering Tithe, then I do that. Otherwise, I kind of have to rely on the rest of the table to help dealing with those problems.
How about you, Chris?
I agree with Max on that. When I think about blue's more of I want card advantage. I want to be able to do weird and wacky shenanigans. I don't really want to worry about the board itself, per se, as to worry about the cards that are going to hurt me in the, overall. So it's like with the counter spells, if someone jams, a 2/2 creature, you're like, whatever. Now if someone jams like a 12/12 flyer with double strike and lifelink and you lose the game, it's like, no, that's got to go. So I mean, that's where I look at it with blue. You don't worry about the bounce, you don't worry about the other stuff. You worry about, your key cards and then your game plan. Don't worry about everybody else's plan.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I do with blue as well. I have a mono blue deck, and I've got enough bounce things in there anyway that to deal with any problem, basically. I don't have that many, but I have a couple. That's good enough. Otherwise, I will rely on a few counter spells as well. I think blue never feels like it's handicapped because it has enough answers for sure. Is there anything you guys tend to like here among blue to solve a few of these problems, aside from counter spells?
Not really.
Okay.
I think it kind of just depends on what your deck is trying to do. So in Brago, I run Vanishing Mists, I think is what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
Where you enchant a permanent, it gets a fading counter on it, but when the enchantment leaves the battlefield, the controller sacrifices the permanent it was enchanted to. So again, it's something I can abuse with Brago's ability. Otherwise, It's a very slow-moving train to get rid of a problem.
Yeah, I've kind of found that as well, that I'll run enough things to solve other problems that will just accidentally work well enough on dealing with artifacts and enchantments. I've got a Rift in the deck, and I need to get this person's flyers out of the way, so I will just single target that Eldrazi Monument or something, which is enough to let me poke through for damage. Or I'm already running Swan Song to deal with primarily instants and sorceries, but it also happens in enchantments.
Yep.
There's enough of those things that just accidentally wind up working in blue.
Well, that's the thing I noticed though, is that you don't see a whole lot of mono blue decks. And when you do see a mono blue, aside from your Talrand, most of them are like a combo based deck. Like you have your Azami or whatever and all that. So blue usually splashes into another color, which I'm guessing probably 80% of the time it's white, something like that. So you get the access to those,
often.
The cards that you need to remove that stuff.
Yeah.
I'm just going to backtrack here. That card I was just speaking of is called Reality Acid. Don't know why I made up a different card name for that.
That would be from the Time Spiral one, right?
Planar Chaos, yep.
That card wreaks havoc if someone doesn't deal with it when it hits the board in that deck.
Right, and the best part about that card is even if you do deal with Reality Acid, once it's on something, you're losing it no matter what. It's not it's because Reality Acid left the battlefield, not the permanent itself. So you're still getting dinged if you can't stop it on the stack.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's harsh. All right, let's jump over here now to black, I guess, which we already kind of covered their big thing, but they do have a few other older options, or at least their first attempts at doing this. Chris has a few here in his notes. You want to mention these here, Chris?
So there's a couple of other ones that were similar on the aspect of the Feed the Swarm, and that is like Myra of Misery, which is out of one of the recent commander decks where each opponent sacrifices a creature or an enchantment. And then you have like Farika's Libation, which is, I'm not sure what set that's from. It's another newer recent one where it's choose one target opponent.
I think it was from the new Theros set, I believe.
Yep. So choose one target opponent, sacrifice a creature, and then, or the other one is target opponent sacrifices an enchantment. So they were already kind of starting to push that, trying to figure out what they could do. And now we actually have one that is straight up just you get to choose what you're destroying.
Yeah, the other ones all let your opponents dodge it if they needed to, whereas now they've kind of zoomed in a little bit on you can just solve the problem if you are willing to pay some life.
Yep.
Which I guess, we talked about how this was maybe their conservative way to do that without risking breaking anything. Those were definitely the even more conservative versions of this.
Yes,
they
were.
Definitely didn't want to break anything. So they are definitely slowly, nudging those dials to the left to try to increase the power a little bit. So there's a few other ones here in black, but I think this was one of those things you just try to remove the player. In the past, at least. It's like someone plays something you can't deal with. You're like, well, I'm going straight at your face. Red is where things get a little more interesting. Red can't deal with enchantments aside from Chaos Warp if it's anything, but it's got a gazillion ways to deal with artifacts. There's Sweepers, Shatterstorm, and then Chris put Obliterate and Jocular Hops in here that destroy everything, basically.
They're still Sweepers.
They are, you bet. The place where it really shines, though, I think, is the single target artifact removal that can scale up. So you have Vandal Blast, single red for a sorcery that destroys an artifact, but if you overload it, it destroys all your opponent's artifacts. We mentioned it before, but that's a crazy effective card. There's also Shattering Spree and By Force that do a similar thing where you can either single target it or you can spend more mana and hit multiple different things if you want to. Those are all three, I think, really, really good spells. And one thing I will note here about artifacts, I went through and looked at my decks. I run, on average, 5 more artifacts than I do enchantments in my decks.
Because they're colorless.
Well, right, and that's also when you bear in mind that I have a deck with no artifacts, my Sigarda deck.
Yep.
So even like counting that in the math, I'm still averaging 5 more artifacts and enchantments. So I think that also maybe helps the single target stuff that just hits artifacts be a little bit better than the single target stuff that hits enchantments, because there tends to be more targets. Almost every deck has a Soul Ring. Every deck, or most decks at least, have multiple different kinds of mana rocks. Whereas, as good as oftentimes enchantments are, there's plenty of decks that are only running like 2 or 3. Whereas there's just a lot of decks that are running, 10, 12, 15 artifacts, even if it isn't the theme, just because they're colorless, like you said, and they just do so many different things.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any ones you guys really like here and want to talk about in red?
I think we missed one in red, in Enchanter's Bane. So this was from one of the Commander 18 set.
Yep.
It's an enchantment that says at the beginning of your end step, target enchantment deals damage equal to its CMC to its controller unless that player sacrifices it. So similar to the 2 black spells Chris mentioned, we're leaving it up to our opponent to make the decision to keep it or take the damage. So I feel like this is kind of a very similar to Feed the Swarm.
Now, have you tried Enchanter's Bane at all? Or had it cast on you?
No.
I think I've seen it 2 or 3 different times. What I wound up finding out, or how it felt to me, was if the enchantment was good enough for someone to pick it for the most part, you just paid the life because it was good enough. And if you were willing to lose it, then it probably wasn't that good in the first place. Like, it might have been something that you, at that point in the game, didn't care about. It just never felt like it quite did enough.
Yeah.
But it is still an option. And if you are playing mono red, and particularly like maybe you're playing in a small meta with the same group of friends, and 2 people have Enchantress decks, and you're playing mono red, then maybe that's worth it. Particularly if they happen to play like big 7 mana enchantments, and you'd be like, well, you can take 7 damage every turn. That changes the math a little bit too. Any other spells here you guys like in red?
Well, the big one that, everyone probably plays is Dockside Extortionist. While you're not destroying anything, you're just gaining value for your opponents playing all those cards,
I mean, you're definitely punishing people for it.
Yeah, you may not be getting rid of it, but you're getting just as much value out of it as they are by just casting a single creature.
Well, and, that's a good point. We didn't really talk about it in blue. We talked about bounce and talked about counter spells, but like blue's got a ton of ways to steal artifacts and enchantments.
Sure do.
I mean, there's very few situations where spending 2 mana on a steal enchantment doesn't put you ahead. Like taking someone's, privileged position or something is really, really good for 2 mana. That's better than destroying it in a lot of cases. So yeah, that's a good point that changing the math on this stuff is almost as good in a lot of situations.
Yep.
Shenanigans was a new card we also got recently.
Yeah, I had to put that one on there because you're talking about repetitive artifact removal. I'm like, hey, shenanigans.
Yep. And I wonder if that's one of those situations where it's the upside there, which is dredging 1, is worth having the spell.
Yeah,
it depends on the deck, but it might be.
I mean, yeah, if you're playing, let's say, mono red, probably not. But if you're playing in like red black where you have the reanimating effects or something else, you're just like, oh, we dredge this, we get this back, I destroy that artifact. Oh, now I got this guy in here. Or even like I talk about flashback cards all the time. And I think if you can play them, you should play them. And, being able to dredge it in there to flash it back, that's pretty good too.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of almost like a spell shaper thing. You're turning the top card of your library into the shenanigans that you're probably going to then recast. And the next time you need to do that again. Yeah. Yeah, that one's real good. Any from you here, Max?
Nope, I don't really play red, so I'm leaving this up to you guys.
Okay.
Because you play the lesser of all the colors?
I play the best colors, green, white, and blue.
Well, okay, so let's jump over here to green, Max. Green can hit artifacts and enchantments. It's not limited at all. It has sweepers that hit one or both as well. What are your favorites here in green?
Ooh, so some of my favorites, Deglamour, Unravel the Aether are probably my top 2 because they get the shuffle in effect. I always look for that. Shuffle, exile, destroy is kind of how I rank getting rid of whatever I'm getting rid of. And then sacrifice, I guess, will lump in with destroy because it ends up in the graveyard. Shuffling something back into their deck is a lot harder to recur than putting it into someone's graveyard or back into their hand.
Well, sure, there's also the added utility of doing it in response to a top deck tutor or response to a god going back 3 from the top or something.
We don't need to talk about that. I just got over it happening to me a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I think, so I'm going to stop you there. Dana just brought this up, the shuffling. And when we first started playing, Mogus was one of my first commander decks. And Dana always, every time I played him, he'd just be like, unravel him. And he goes into my deck and I'm like, thank you, whoever came up with the idea. Guess what? You can choose where your commander goes now.
Yep. That made that a lot less effective for sure.
I remember every time you did it, just that smile on your face, and I'm like, this sucks.
I mean, there's also things like, I don't run it because it doesn't fly, but like Bane of Progress is a house. It drops down, it destroys a bunch of stuff, it gets bigger. I've debated running something like Fracturing Gust in Jermoka just as a enchantment sweeper, plus I gain life, so it fits into the deck. Those are some of my favorites. Piers Whim is an all-star from, Battle Bond, although I don't know. I cast that this week on stream, and, it got rid of a Signet. It got rid of the big problem off of one player's table, and it got rid of a Signet, and someone else didn't have anything. But sometimes I think, is that Hall of the Bandit Lord really worth a Signet and maybe a Soul Ring, or a Signet nothing for 4 mana? But
I do think it's much better if you have a couple of real, if you're maybe playing Black Green and you can go grab a couple of coffers or something. I think you have that kind of land. It definitely feels way, way better than if you're just going to get like a dual land or something.
Right.
How about you, Chris? What do you like in green for artifact and enchantment removal?
Well, we talked about like the big ones, and the ones that I wrote down for our notes were more of them that you don't see too much anymore. At least I haven't lately. And I like cards, especially when you're playing green. We're talking about Bane of Progress. Green is known for creatures. So all your abilities in like your enchantments, they buff your creatures, make things stronger and all that. So you got Acidic Slime, Reclamation Sage. Those 2 cards both can hit, multiple targets. And it's a creature base.
And in green, it's so easy to use them multiple times.
Yes.
Like, there's so many times that Reclamation Sage comes down and you're like, oh, I'm going to see that again in this Marin deck every single turn, basically.
Yes.
For sure.
Other ones are like Force of Vigor, which is a new card where you can, pitch a green card to get rid of 2 things, at instant speed type of deal. You got Cross and Grip. amazing card. Yes, it's a little higher in the CMC curve, but split second, no one can respond to it. Another one I used to play is Rending Vines. 3 mana, destroy target artifact or enchantment equal to the CMC of like the number of cards in your hand, but you get to draw a card off of it. So you're like replacing
itself
it.
Is super nice.
And then a new one that I've been looking at is Wilt. It's a naturalize. So it hits one or the other, but also has the cycling. So it's versatile where you can get rid of it if you don't need it type of deal.
A couple I like in here as well. Calming Verse is enchantments only, but if you don't have any lands untapped at the end of casting it, basically, it doesn't hit your stuff. So it winds up being like almost like a Vandal Blast for enchantments in green. And if you're playing green-blue or something, you probably want to not tap out because you tend to like to have counterspell mana. But like if you're playing green, just mono green, or you're playing even green-red where you're just doing all your stuff main phase, that's still a really, really solid card, I think.
Yes.
I've seen Creeping Corrosion cast a few times. I think that was in the Mirrodin block when there were a ton of artifacts everywhere, but it's an artifact sweeper in green, and I've seen that cast before to really good effect as well. But I think you guys hit the nail on the head. Green tends to like to do stuff attached to a creature body.
Yep.
But in Brain of Progress is just disgusting.
Out of just the 5 monocolors here, is green the best when it comes to artifact and enchantment removal between the targeted spells or creatures? Like I don't think any other color has both.
Yeah, I would say white can do artifacts and enchantments as well, and it does creatures better than green, I think, but I think green does artifacts and enchantments better than white. White can hit them, but I think green's better at it.
Right.
And it can deal with creatures with fight effects, and it can deal with planeswalkers because it has the best creatures that almost always have trample. So like I think in general, green is just the best at removal probably overall.
Green is the best.
Green is, I mean, it definitely feels that way most of the time for sure.
Well, it is a discussion I've had with numerous people, and always, after you have a good debate with them, you come to the same conclusion that green is probably the most powerful color in the game of Magic.
Yeah, well, and it's definitely not a situation like sometimes you used to get those situations where this color was good in this format but not good somewhere else.
Yep.
Green's amazing in standard and modern. Like green's just great everywhere.
Yes, it is.
So whoever's in charge of defending green cards at WotC, if that's what you want to have achieved, you've successfully done it. That's what you're shooting for.
Hey,
mission accomplished.
I almost lived the dream of Rishkar's expertise into a Return of the Wild speaker for the free spell the other day. And instead I decided to ramp.
Instead of just drawing every card.
Because I knew I needed a Reliquary Tower and I didn't want a chance not drawing it in the next 6 cards.
Sure. Oh, that's funny. Okay, so the last but not least here, let's talk about a few different gold options. Are there anything here that you guys really like in terms of gold or multicolor, I should say, that really stand out to you for artifact and enchantment removal?
Anything in Orzhov?
Yeah. I mean, granted, a lot of those are kind of things that we said don't really count, but I guess they kind of do because if you're playing Orzhov, you don't need to worry about artifact and enchantment removal because you have access to things that remove everything.
Yep.
You have your Utter Ends and your Vindicates and your Anguish Unmakings and your De-Sparks that will just hit any target. At that point, if you have those kind of spells, why are you bothering for the most part with artifact and enchantment removal when you have all removal?
Yeah.
Right.
Which I noticed
definitely a good one.
A lot of the multicolored cards are more of an all removal base, because now we got Assassin's Trophy and stuff like that. So they're kind of moving towards that where, if you want to play the double colors, then you can pull away from being selective on this is strictly one target, whereas this is every target.
Yeah, they definitely are willing to ratchet up the power slightly when it's a multicolored card because of that restriction. Although I don't know if it's that much of a restriction with mana bases these days. It definitely isn't in Commander.
No.
But there's some real good ones. Rakdos Charm, I think, it's only artifacts, but it's got 2 other really good modes. So the upside on the limitation is worth it. I think Golgari Charm similarly only hits enchantments, but the ability to, sweep away 1/1s or regenerate your stuff with the other modes is really, really good.
Yep.
So there's a few of those there. I think Hull Breach in green or red, being able to hit 2 targets for 2 mana, or Wear and Tear letting you hit 2 targets for 3 mana in red-white is also really, really good.
Yeah. Now, isn't there a green-white one that sweeps the board and you gain life?
That's Fracturing Gust.
Fracturing Gust.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, and it hits your stuff too, but it's still 5 mana to destroy all artifacts and enchantments. But like, there's definitely plenty of green-white, say elf decks or something where like you aren't running that many artifacts and enchantments yourself anyway, because it's a very creature-heavy deck.
Yep.
You're just going to gain a ton of life and wipe everyone's junk out and not care.
So
that
kind of
one's
like
really good.
Like Seed Spark or something like that, where you can populate it and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yep.
A couple I really like that are gold cards are Artifact and Aura Mutation.
Oh,
So
yeah.
The Artifact Mutation is red-green. It's an instant, and then you destroy an artifact, and it can't be regenerated, and you create 1 green Saproling tokens, where X is that CMC. And Aura Mutation is essentially the same thing, but in Selesnya, and it's an enchantment.
Yeah, that's perfect value there. I mean, you're destroying something and gaining on top of it. I mean, oof.
And at instant speed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those two cards I haven't seen a whole lot of neither over the past couple of years. It kind of seemed like they were falling out of favor, and I don't know why. Or maybe people just don't think about them.
They're relatively old, yeah.
They're old, and if you aren't, I guess if I'm playing like a big stompy Gruul deck, I'd rather just run maybe something that is going to shuffle it into their library, because what are 4 1/1 Saprolings going to do if I have no way to buff those tokens except for just using them as chump blockers type
I suppose
of thing.
if you're playing red-green, instead of destroying the artifact, you would rather play like a Hellkite Tyrant and steal all the artifacts
and
instead.
steal it.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, one thing kind of worth noting about those in particular is you don't necessarily need to actually destroy the artifact to get
Correct.
the tokens. Because I've seen them cast on Darksteel Forge at least once, if not twice, or seen the artifact mutation, with a person knowing full well they're not going to destroy it, but like, I'm going to take my, is it 9? Is Darksteel Forge 9 mana, or is it 7? Whichever it is, I'm going to take my 7 or 9 tokens, and in a token deck where you might well have your Doubling Season out, or have Catherine's Crusade out or something, you don't care. That's just like so much value for you. It's worth just getting the tokens out of them. So that's a situation where like, even if it's just a destroy effect, those are both really, really solid cards for sure.
Yep.
And the kind of last thing I want to note here is Max actually has a shirt that he wears sometimes that he got from the Legendary Creature guys.
I'm wearing it today.
Are you really?
I didn't even put that together.
And it says, what does it say on the shirt? What's the exact wording there?
Always provision, artifact, and enchantment removal, I think.
There we go. It's like a reminder from a Legendary Creature to always provision your artifact and enchantment removal. So shout out to those guys for...
Hate, not removal. Hate.
Hate, all right. And that was... You got that 2018?
3 Vegases ago, if one would have occurred this year, yeah.
So, those guys are sending out the message there early. Always have your hate. All right, I think that is going to wrap up this show from us about specifically artifact and enchantment removal. I'm Dana. You can find me on the Twitter birds at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDR_Max. And you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. Our show was edited by Rafael Garcia. You can find him at Ursa Bearwalker. And our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. We will be back next week with another show. Until then, I am Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.